Years, not enough time. That was
Well, let's do this. Let's focus again on the campaign for a moment in terms of your ideas as a policymaker, because there is a very serious issue that came up a few months ago, which is the Florida FCAT rights scores. The fact that our students can't write to their grade level. The fact that State Board of Education had to lower the bar in order to allow more students to pass. There is a 3-year plan that the superintendent has proposed. This is with the Alliance of Educational Leaders, which is the group of superintendents across the region. What do you believe you can do as a school board member, if elected, to provide confidence to the parents and stakeholders of this community that our kids can be competitive in the next few years?
Well, my campaign is based on change and investing in the elementary school. We have to create a new culture, or some would say what we used to have. I'd say a new culture, because we'll never have what we used to have. We have a large percentage of families that are single-member families. We have a lot of divorces. We have women in the workforce. It's not going to be like we remember, okay? So I don't like to say we're going to go back to that, but we have to create something different, something that makes sense for the culture in which we're living in, and I think the board is instrumental in that. Let me give you one example. Let's use the 3rd grade FCAT. I think the board needs to clearly establish a policy, and I don't know, we have to put this in the right words and all that, that essentially says, that says, if you can't read, write, speak, and compute at the 3rd grade level, you don't go on. Okay? Now, I've talked to several principals. What does that mean? That means, to implement that, every principal I've talked to says, at pre-K, or kindergarten, or 1st grade, or 2nd grade, if you can't read, write, speak, and compute, you don't go on. Now, what happens in the community when something like that happens? Kindergarten. My kid's not going on. What harm does that do? Harms my ego. Okay, I'm the parent. Does it harm the kid? No, because we don't have the resource to catch the kid up. Once you're behind and you leave the 5th grade, there's no intervention. And so what happens? By the 10th grade test, 62% of the 10th graders in Lee County are below grade level in reading. We can't afford that. We've got to fix the problem. I don't like that. It's not a, but we've got to solve this issue at the 3rd grade level. And that means 1st grade. And then, and all of a sudden, this single parent or others say, oh, I do have a role in this. That means summer school, that means whatever, or my son or daughter is going to be here. Now, little Johnny's not going to get a trophy. Got a trophy on everything. Got a trophy for being on the team. And we're not going to be proud to have 57% pass the FCAT. I'm embarrassed. Now, I don't care if that's the state average or not. People across in Milwaukee, where they're doing this, they have a program, 90 schools. 90% of the kids are reading below grade level. 90% are on free or assisted lunch programs. 90% are minority. 90% of the kids in Milwaukee in these schools are reading above grade level. So we know what to do. And so that's where the board comes in and says, this is what we're doing. We can't Band-Aid it forever. And we're going to put resources in these schools to make it happen, whatever it takes, and we're going to make those cultural changes. I don't like to talk about it, but essentially as an educator, it's the learning culture.
Well, let me ask you with regard to, because I know that sometimes school districts' hands are tied because of state regulations, so I'm not going to delve too much into that, things you can't change, but there are perceptions you can change, which is the lack of parental involvement, and also the perception of people who have had their children educated up north or grandchildren educated up north and are saying, why do I have to pay 40 to 50% of my property taxes to the school district that doesn't seem to be functioning, at least in perception? How do you go about to make that argument?
That's a real argument. We're 11th in this state in funding. Lee County is 11th highest, And our graduation rate is 48 out of 67. So those perceptions are fed by reality. We have to stand tall and say, at the beginning, this is not acceptable. And the problem is, it's all over the country. We're just not, I happen to be running for this position. It could be in any county. It could be in the U.S. We used to be, when some people in this room were in school, #1 in public education in the world. We're number 18 out of 36 industrialized countries. People rationalize that differently. The point is, it is the local board. I don't really care about those mandates and all this stuff that, as you say, I can't do anything about that. But we can do something, and the public wants to see, as I've talked with all these people, they want to see a board that is proactive. They want to see a superintendent that is proactive. And that takes a board coming together, supporting where the person wants to go. And if he doesn't get there shortly, or if he doesn't take those steps, then we have to deal with that issue. But we've got to be proactive. We can't be spending our time talking about anonymous letters. I mean, that is a bunch of hooey, as my grandmother would say. And it diverts the attention because no board, public entity, deals with that kind of crap. Well, that reinforces this feeding frenzy. We can't do that. You shouldn't do it anyway, and I won't get into that. I've had anonymous letters all my life. But the point is, we have to run this like a corporate entity. We can't. We've got to say to the people, the principals will be evaluated, and there is an instrument, and this is the schedule. These are things that people are talking about. And so you can't do it all at one time. You deal with this issue, you deal with this issue. You say, here's a game plan. We're going to extend the elementary school day by an hour. We're going to do enrichment. Here's a little thing of what we're doing and why we're going to do it. We talk about that in community groups, and we charge forward. If we don't do that, we're just, you don't need me. You don't need me who's doing this work.
Well, that's a good question, because the board's made up of 5 members, right? And the question is, like we've seen on the county commission, a lot of disagreement, and it's hard to get direction. I think this directly goes back to Dick's question. So the question is, rather than being rubber stamped, how does the board work together, and how would you bring the board together to work on these kinds of challenges?
It is like I worked with my board when I was at Youngstown, except I'm sitting on the board now, okay? You sit down and you discuss an item. Where are the common agreements that we have? What's the common ground? It's what Washington has lost sense. If we're at varying parties, the 2 of us in one party and the 2 of you in another party in Washington, D.C., and we agree on 80% of something, why can't we pass that bill and agree? Now, let's talk about whatever solution we might have as far as cutting the length of the bus routes down, so we can add an hour more in class time. What are the board? We have a discussion about this. Have you seen the briefings that we have at our board meeting? I've gone to those for a year and a half. They don't get briefed. They don't talk about anything. These are powerful meetings. I thought a briefing was when we're sitting down talking about where are we going, coming to agreement. Instead, we get a motion and people are yay or nay, and the board splits even further apart. How you do it, Roy, is you sit down and as I have done with all of the existing board members and the superintendent, and I say, do you agree, with this point here? Do you agree that we need to develop a comprehensive evaluation process for principals? Do we agree? Well, of course we agree. Well, then what's the next step that we agree on? And you build that continuity and say, then, Joe, we're on board. Give us a plan or a proposal or a policy that does this kind of thing. This is how a team works. Yes, we're individuals and we represent different segments of the community, different parts of the community, but this is how a board works. And so we've got to do those things. And yes, sometimes a person is going to disagree. Sometimes a person is going to vote nay.
Well, Mr.
That's
Cochran,
okay.
we are at the end of our interview. Any final thoughts before we conclude?
Well, I want to say, first of all, to thank you for your leadership. It is important service that you provide. A lot of people don't have the time or take the time